Thanks, Alfie. So welcome to Verity Close refurbishment meeting. My name is Bumi Shakoni. I'm the refurbishment design and delivery project manager at Lancaster West Neighbourhood Team, and I'll be chairing this evening's meeting. I'd like to thank you all for coming. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start off with a quick introduction to the Lancaster West team working on the external refurbishment of your estate. And that's the outside of the buildings themselves, the communal spaces, the landscaping. Many of you will have met James Caspel, our neighborhood director. Also here today is Andrew Lizzy, who's the head of refurbishment design and delivery, Alfie Peacock, who is our refurbishment design and delivery project officer, Janet Hall, the Heat Network Engagement Manager. So you probably hear from most of us before the end of the evening. I'll now hand over to Lizzy, who will introduce the ECD team.
All right, the slides stop working. There we go. Hi, I'm Lizzy, and I'm an Associate Director at ECD Architects, and I'm the project architect for the work we're proposing for the refurbishment of Verity Close. And it's very nice to meet you all.
Hi, I'm Niall Ocleirigh, and I'll be working with ECD and I'll be focusing on design and sustainability.
Hi, I'm Jess. I'm an architectural assistant at ECD, and I'm our engagement lead. So we've introduced our side of the design team, but in our minds, all of you residents are also part of the design team. You know, going forward, we want to be collaborating with you at every stage. So we did wonder, I know it's a bit tricky on Zoom, but we did wonder if any of you might like to introduce yourselves, either by briefly switching your camera on to say a quick hello and tell us who you are, or maybe by writing your name in the chat. Of course, if you'd rather not, that's absolutely fine as well. But if there is anybody who'd like to say a quick hello, it'd be great to hear from you now.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, hi.
Hi, my name's Jo Childs. I'm the owner occupier of one of the houses, a mid-terrace house in Verity Close.
Thanks, Jo, thanks for joining us.
How much of what we're going to be covering has any relevance to me, so I thought, but there's only one way to find out.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us, Jo, nice to hear from you.
I'll mute myself again now and also disappear to go and collect my tea downstairs.
Very important.
Very important.
Hi, Stephen. Hello.
Hello. Yes. Hi, Stephen Montague. I live at 23 Verity Close, and I'm a homeowner. Well, I own the flat, so I'm curious as to what is going to happen.
Brilliant.
All that. I've just had a new heater put in, and so. Yeah, anyway, I'm curious as to what happens next.
Thanks for joining us. And I've just seen, I think it's Michelle's just said a hello. Hi, Michelle. Thanks for joining us. Brilliant. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to hand over to James, I think, now.
Yes, I'll just go through the agenda. So the meeting will last an hour and a half and will run as follows. James Caspel will give a brief introduction. It'll be followed by ECD architects who are working on the refurbishment of your block. They'll go through your top 10 priorities for Verity Close, as well as the possible improvement works to the blocks and houses. They'll be followed by Janet Hall, who will introduce the Heat Network. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions, share your views. So feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat, or raise your hand to ask directly. So for any latecomers, a little bit of housekeeping. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our communication channels for residents unable to attend. I would ask everyone to keep their microphones on mute unless they're speaking. We do encourage a camera on policy if you're comfortable with that. So please do turn your cameras on, especially when you're speaking. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to James Caspel, our neighborhood director.
Thank you, Bumi, and thank all of you for joining us today. A really great number of people for our meeting Verity Close, and we're really looking forward to sharing our initial ideas with you, and also, as has been said, hearing from you really as we start this next stage of our exciting refurbishment journey. So it's incumbent on me just to outline why we're meeting, what are we here to do today. So the first thing is that many of you have already engaged with us, whether it be the Ideas Days in 2018, the prioritisation workshops, or the open house at 25 Verity Close that I know dozens of residents attended, to build on what you've already told us in terms of what your priorities are, as we now move into the detailed design stage of the refurbishment. So what we're going to hear today is the architects sharing what their current understanding is of your priorities, some of the learning that's taken place, and some of the outcomes of some of the surveys that have also been undertaken, and then opportunity to hear from you in terms of what might be missing, or some new things that maybe we've all spent more time in our homes in the last year than we ever have. Maybe there's some new things that you'd like us to consider. So we're going to discuss those initial refurbishment ideas, capture any concerns, questions that you might have. I want to be absolutely clear that today is not a decision-making meeting. We're going to talk about a lot of different building elements. It can be quite technical at times. And I just want to sort of make clear that today is about the start of an ongoing conversation. It will take many weeks, perhaps months in some cases. And we'll be engaging with you not just digitally, but in terms of face-to-face and via a manner of other ways that we can in the weeks and months ahead. So moving forwards, we will start to get a sense of some of the preferences that might come up today, that might come up at a later date. Increasingly, we'll be able to hone in, if you like, in terms of those preferred options, review the feedback in a sort of you said we did type fashion. And ultimately, what we're looking to do together is get as many residents as possible to agree, where possible, on those final design proposals, and then we'll get on and deliver the works. Next slide, please. So just to remind all of us, so our shared vision is one of putting Lancaster West on the map for all the right reasons. So it's been promised that the estate will become a 21st century model for social housing. Last January, the council committed to ensure that all homes on Verity Close, and indeed all of its estates, are carbon neutral by 2030. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And the most crucial thing, so what makes us different than any other estate or any other programme that you might have received by previous management providers, is that we want to co-design as much as you want to co-design with us. And that includes the process as well as the actual content of what we're discussing. So we really welcome, as Jess said, if people want to contribute, either they put their hand up or flick their camera on, or they just want to put ideas in the chat or follow up with us afterwards, feel free to do so. We'll talk a little bit as well around next steps and some of the communication channels that we'll look to open with you so that we can have a more conversational dialogue and share ideas. Next slide, please. So I want to start with some extremely positive news, not just for Verity Close, but for the whole estate. So following a lot of work by the Residents Association and here at the Neighbourhood Team, we're in a place where we'll be shortly publicly announcing the receipt of additional funding. And that additional funding will mean that we've got an extra £25,000 per home on average in terms of the level of works and improvements that we're able to deliver. So Lizzie's going to take us through a gold, silver and bronze approach to the different options and improvements that could potentially be made. And when you're looking at those, to be absolutely clear, we're now in a place, which we certainly weren't 6 months ago, to be looking at the silver gold options. So we've got a once in a generation opportunity to use that investment, if residents agree, to take our homes to a level far beyond any retrofit, I think it's fair to say, at an estate-wide level. There's lots of retrofits around the country. They generally focus on a small number of homes. We're looking for the whole estate to be at a really high level of energy performance. And we have, of course, as many of you will have seen, the extensive building works, our first low-energy council home at Verity Close, just on Lancaster Road. And Lizzie and the team will refer to that as we move forwards. Next slide, please. So I'd just like to welcome Joe. Thank you, Joe. It's great to have one of our freeholders here. Milk and 2 sugars, by the way, Joe, if you pop down there again. But we've got an interesting situation with Verity Close, and that we have 16 freeholders, where in terms of the relationship and I suppose more positively the service charges, they're relatively minimal. What we're quite clear about is that Verity Close, like Lancaster West, is about a community. It's not just about our tenants versus our leaseholders. And we wanted to share with you, we might have some leaseholders with us who are in the flats, we might have some leaseholders who are right to buy purchasers of the housing. And what we'll be doing in due course is providing a more detailed matrix, if you like, of what's in front of you. What it shows is who's responsible for repairing and replacing different building elements. So on the far right-hand side there, Joe, you can see yourself and other freeholders are ultimately responsible for nearly all of the elements of your building. So other than things like drainage, common areas, parking, some landscaping, things like that, we wouldn't be looking to refurbish freeholder properties. Now, one of the things we are looking to do, probably in about 18 months' time, is allow our leaseholders and freeholders to potentially buy into our kitchens and bathrooms programme if they wish to. So that will allow you to get things at a much better cost than you would if you went to B&Q and Wickes and Howdens and Travis Perkins and all the rest of it. So that will be a discussion for a later day. But today is to focus primarily on the main block refurbishment, as we call it, or the external refurbishment. And so for leaseholders who are in the houses or the flats, when we're talking about triple glazed windows, as we're going to do tonight, this is an opportunity for all of you, whether you're a tenant or a leaseholder. There are obviously charging implications, and we can follow up with a bit more detail in due course on that as well. But I just wanted to be upfront that we're well aware that Verity Close is our most complex relationship in terms of landlord and tenant and freeholder and leaseholder and so on, and that's something we want to make really clear, because it's quite obvious to anyone walking around Verity Close that there's been a pepper potting of investment. We've still got homes that have got single glazing, for example, and that's something we would want to address as we move through the programme. So that's it from me. I'd like to thank you all again for participating today. I'm looking forward to lots of questions, perhaps a lively debate, and hopefully a real sense of momentum as we move forward in the weeks to come. So I'll hand over now, I think, to Lizzy to take it from here. Thank you.
So actually, Niall's going to talk about the existing, sort of our understanding of existing homes first. So over to you, Niall.
Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for coming this evening. It's great, really exciting. So essentially, what have we been doing over the last few months? So essentially, we've spent the last few months getting to know Verity Close. We don't live there. So what we've done is we've had the opportunity, limited opportunity at the moment, to walk around and see those amazing sunflowers. Whoever owns them, I'm amazed, but very impressive. And to get to know the estate in so much as we can, and it's a shame that we can't meet face to face at the moment. We will one day, to get everybody to get to know people who live there better. So in doing that, what we did in the meantime was we've created 3D models, drawings, a sketch here, trying to understand the houses and also the flats. And even from that, we've created energy models. And most importantly here is understanding your priorities. And the flyers here show the outcomes of the Ideas Day that happened quite a while back now. And from what we took from this, and our priority for the time being, and what we've specifically addressed here, is what we focused on is energy efficiency and making your homes more comfortable. And out of these priorities in relation to this come windows, boilers, roof, and also soundproofing falls into that as well. And over the course of this design process, there will also be other members of the wider design team and the Lancaster West Neighbourhood Team who will help resolve the other priorities that you've highlighted. So as you'll see in going through this presentation, our focus will lead essentially to a holistic improvement to Verity Close, the houses and the flats. Next slide, please. So what we see here in focusing for now on energy efficiency issues, what we've identified technically to some degree is where essentially heat loss. So what's making your building cold, and what's making it too hot as well in the same sense. And the first thing we've identified, and probably obvious to yourself living there, is the windows. They're not great. They leak. There's gaps around it, so which any air that leaks in and out is losing energy or bringing cold air in. So it's one of the primary issues which is causing heat loss through the building and therefore making them cooler. Other issues we found is inadequate ventilation in extractor fans or permanent vents, which are leading to mold growth or generally cold spots within the building. Other areas is overheating in the dormers, and so essentially which just leads us to is, by understand these items, we can begin to address and resolve some of the issues. Next slide, please. So this kind of goes into a bit more detail about, technically, why is that heat loss through the building and through the roof? So essentially in the current construction, or the very original construction, was essentially like a cavity wall with two leaves and an air gap in the middle. At some point in time, that was filled with an insulation to try and stem the heat loss, or essentially making your rooms colder. And as good as the effort was, it left gaps and it wasn't consistent. And you can see essentially air leaking through, leading to heat loss. And that happens also through the windows. As you can see, the arrows run through the windows. Generally, the buildings leak overall. So on the next slide there.
Niall, I have a question from Jackie. Yeah. Are the windows which are replaced with double glazing leaking and causing heat loss? That's a question.
So essentially, go ahead, Lizzy. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, from the work that we did at what's now the low energy house on Verity Close, when we went to visit that, it was apparent that the installation of the windows, so they were windows from 2013, double glazed units, but they'd not been particularly well installed, so that there's air leakage around where the window meets the walls, but also that when you shut the windows, they didn't shut very tightly. So there was air leaking between the frame and the window pane, even when it was closed. So you're losing warm air out through that gap and you get a cold draft near the window. It may be that across the close, some of the windows are a bit better installed, but I know from speaking to a couple of people that they're aware as well that their windows aren't as good as they might be.
Great, thanks, Lizzy.
Yeah, and that situation with windows installed, in the early 2010s is not unique. My house is the same period as Verity Close and same issues, and it's just poor installation really in the most part. So on this slide is the energy performance certificates, and what this does is it verifies our understanding of the performance of the building and what leads to that rating, which on Verity Close is around band C, which is fairly significant heat loss, which it's not the worst. So they float around C and D, and this essentially confirms our beliefs in what are the issues around heat loss and your home's underperforming in terms of energy and comfort. The next slide there. So, and furthermore to this, what we also see from resident reports is that there's quite significant amount of issues around heating and hot water. And this again leads furthermore to inadequate heat or energy performance in the building, which is you can experience yourself, which leads to lack of comfort and so on. The next slide there, please. So Verity Close, how does it sit in relation to the rest of the UK and what we're proposing? So in green is Verity Close, and the energy intensity over the year is 146 kilowatts per meter square per year. So comparatively to the average UK home, new build, existing and so on, it's 140. So it's not too much worse than average. And so going forward, what we're trying to do, so what we're going to introduce, or what Liz is going to introduce over the next few slides, is options for how you improve your current home from bronze right through to silver and gold. And so in orange is the bronze standard, how the difference it can make in doing those measures, and Lizzy will get into that. On average, a new build home in the UK is around 50 kilowatt hours. And what we're aiming for, and hopefully this funding will get us there, or help get us there, is silver and gold standard, 38 kilowatts. And this is like significant, you know, in terms of performance. You'll really notice a significant difference. And so that's, you can see going from green to gold, it's quite a change. Next slide there. So, you know, in the same works, what we're trying to achieve is actually address more than a number of issues in the same, I guess, time. So what we hear from yourselves is that there's a number of issues around soundproofing between units, between floors within your units, and there's a number of things we can do to improve this. And Lizzy will go into a lot more detail later on this. Next slide. So then generally outside the state and the approach to your building, outside of purely just energy efficiency of the home, is, you know, the welcome into your home and what the issues, some of the issues that raises the entrances. And at the moment, it's the entrance door is next to the bin store, and from what we understand is they're, first of all, aesthetically imposing, and secondly, you have the doors next to the bin store, so probably not the best welcome. So in addressing all these issues or around energy efficiency, we have the opportunity to improve these entrances. Next slide there. So I've just kind of explained what we know to the best of my ability for now. And so there's a lot we don't know, and we'd really like to know. So is there anything else we need to know? You can tell us now, or we can learn more as we go further forward. Thank you.
So Susan's just been in the chat. The windows in our flats were replaced in 2013 and they are double glazed. That's a comment. But feel free to respond to that now.
Yeah, so that's how we understand that. Yeah, as Lizzy said earlier on, double glazing, and at the time, what product was available was the best at its time. Unfortunately, they were not necessarily well installed or well sealed, more so. And in improving these, like switching these to say triple glazing, if we get to that point, that they will be really well sealed, because that's what we do now. And
I'll talk you through in a bit more detail about the benefits of triple glazing when we come to the proposals for that.
Excellent.
I personally had a particular question for residents, particularly people who live in the flats. We're aware that there are issues with soundproofing, particularly in the houses, but in the flats, it would be good to hear whether people have issues between flats, or between flats above them and below them, or between the flats and the stairwell, because obviously everyone's got a slightly different home in a different location, and understanding that from any of you would be really useful.
I certainly have an issue. Can you hear me?
Yes,
yeah?
Thank you.
Stephen Montague. Yes, at the Blockwood 23, and yes, the sound issues between, I mean, fortunately I have rather quiet neighbors, but it is an issue, the sound issue, in that it is not very well soundproofed. And also the fact that the halls are extremely noisy because they have hard surfaces, so there's a lot of reverberation there.
Yeah.
But just back on the window issue, I mean, unless you tell me otherwise, my windows seem extremely secure and safe, and as a leaseholder, I'm not really wild about having them changed financially.
I mean, I suspect that there's variation across the homes as well. And certainly, as James said at the beginning, some of the homes still have single glazed windows. So, but obviously yours sounds like they are performing reasonably well. So yeah, we'll have some discussion about we'll present what's possible, but that doesn't mean it's something that has to happen.
Yeah, the soundproofing is an issue. I mean,
I just need to better understand, is that mostly through the walls or through the ceiling or floor?
It's the floors that seem to be very poorly acoustically treated. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much.
Lizzy, Maggie would like to ask a question. She's got her hand up. Maggie?
Oh, yes, I'm here. Sorry. My question is pertaining to the floors. Now, I have holes in my floors. I know you did surveys of a few of the houses, and I know this was raised when we had the talk in the sports centre. Now, because I know one of my neighbours said that they have holes also in their floors between the floorboards and the walls. Now, I have holes, actual holes where the boards on the floor are caving in through wear and tear. I don't know, but they're getting pockets of holes. I've been boarding them up, and it stopped me from doing stuff in my house. I don't know if it's an issue to do with damp. I don't know if they got wet previously to me being a tenant here, but I do know that these holes are created if you drop something or you fall, you take a step, you can step through holes in my house.
Gosh, I wasn't aware that such bad problems were existing in people's floors. So that's clearly something we need to address. So thank you for raising it. One thing I would say is from the floors that I've been able to look at so far, there was quite a variety of floorboard materials. So some had actual floorboards, and even within one house, there was a variety of different flooring.
These are chipboard floors.
Okay.
And chipboard is wearing and tearing. Yeah, and it's got a lot of bounce in places. You can see it caving in into the front room slightly from the bedroom above. And then the bedroom has got a hole in the landing, and then there's a hole in the top floor.
Right. I suspect we better sort of have a specific conversation with you outside this meeting, but also we're hoping to do a pop-up event, but also maybe some one-to-one surveys.
I don't know the windows. From they put those windows in 2010, 13, I don't have an issue with those windows. They work perfectly well to me. The cold spot in my house where heat is lost is in the front room to do with that bay bit, to do with the front door, right? Because this house never had an upgrade of the front door. It's never had an upgrade of the back door.
Maggie, just come there. So Lizzy is going to be talking about the improvement works to the doors, the windows, fire safety upgrades, and I think Liz also mentioned insulation, damp-proof course to the ground floor slab. So Lizzy is going to go into that in more detail. Yes. So Lizzy. Yeah.
But yeah, what I hope we can do is sort of, as we continue to work with you, get a bit more of the specific information about people's homes, because they've obviously all had different maintenance over time. So there will be variation, and we need to understand that. Bimi, are there more questions, or shall I carry on?
Yes, please carry on.
Okay, thank you. And thank you everyone for your questions and your comments. So as James said at the beginning, we want to make Verity Close part of this 21st century Lancaster West Estate. And part of that is trying to achieve net zero carbon across the estate. So net zero carbon means that we want to get to a balance between the energy used in your home on this side of the seesaw, all the heating, the lighting, the energy used through plug sockets and so on. And we need to balance that out with renewable energy sources that can power the energy you do need in your home. But there's obviously a limit to how much renewable energy sources we're going to be able to implement within Verity Close. So in order to make this balance out, we really need to reduce the amount of energy that's used in your home. And the easiest way to do that, and what will make your homes most comfortable as well, is to try and reduce the heat demand or improve the energy efficiency of your home so that we're losing less heat through walls, through roofs, through floors. But also we obviously need to look at those renewable energy sources. So that's great for saving the planet and reducing our carbon emissions, which is really important, but there's other benefits. So reducing drafts and heat loss through those drafts will make homes more comfortable. And and reducing heat loss will mean that you've got lower fuel bills. And this using renewable energy, and rather than having gas burning in your boiler to heat hot water to heat your homes, we can do that by other means, and that means improved air quality because we don't have gas burning in every home. And also, as you know, Verity Close is the home of the first low energy council home in the area. And we were involved in working on this, which has been a great experience, both in understanding the construction of one of the existing houses, but also in trying out some new ideas and seeing what's possible. And in this particular home, we had a really great opportunity because there wasn't anyone living in the home at the time, which made it easier to do a really deep refurbishment. So we've been able to install roof insulation and install insulation on the inside of the external walls and all down the roof, and make the home really airtight, so we're not losing heat through air creeping out through those gaps in the wall. So this insulation is helping to reduce the energy used in the home, so bringing that energy use down. But we've also installed things like an air source heat pump, so we're increasing the amount of renewable energy that's used. So we're able to come closer to that net zero carbon balance that we were talking about. And then we've also on the outside of the building got photovoltaic panels. We've got triple glazed windows, and also triple glazed doors with insulated, the part of the door that isn't glazed is insulated. And we've got an electric car charging point. But obviously a really important part of everything we want to do here, and part of making a model 21st century estate, is that fire safety's got to be absolutely key. And that's something we've done in the low energy home we've already worked on, and that we'll be bringing forward into any work that we propose to the rest of the close. So we're working with an independent fire consultant to ensure that everything we're proposing is complying with regulations. But we've also agreed with Lancaster West that we'll only use materials with the highest fire rating or fire safety rating of A1 or A2 in any external building layers. So now for a little game. This is a picture of 4 houses on Princedale Road, just down the road. And one of them is a super efficient, highly insulated home with triple glazed windows. And if you'd like to get involved, it'd be great if you can make a guess at whether it's house 1, house 2, house 3, or finally house 4. If anyone wants to shout out answers, go for it.
Or you can put your answers in the chat.
Yep, that's great too.
I say house 1.
Any more takers? Well, Stephen's getting the prize by default. Well,
3, Michelle has put 3 as well.
Ooh, good guess, good guess.
Yes. And then there's a 4 from Fazim.
Well, I shall reveal that it is in fact house number 3.
Yes.
So the point of what we're saying here is that it's possible to make a huge difference to how warm and cozy your home is without necessarily changing that much on how it appears on the outside of the building. So these windows here, they may look a lot like the other windows, but they're actually triple glazed windows. They do open differently. They don't open like a conventional sash window, and you can actually see that they're just slightly open, the bottom part of them here. But they don't look that different. And there are different ways of going about insulating buildings and improving their energy efficiency. And I'll run through some of those now, but I think it's just important to make this point that it doesn't have to make a radical change to the external appearance of a building. So there's this really exciting opportunity for all these improvements we can make. And as James said, we've got sort of 3 different standards, all of which address kind of the whole home, not just some little bit of it, but each one tries to address a sort of a package of problems. So we've got a bronze standard, a silver standard, and a gold standard. And the bronze standard will make improvements to energy savings and so on in your home and the bills you're paying, but it's not such a big improvement. But the silver standard will really make quite a big difference, both in terms of energy and bills. And then the gold standard, which is basically like the silver standard, but also with photovoltaic panels, will even further reduce energy bills. So we'll start with the bronze standard. So as we say, we've got things in your homes like these vents through the walls. And in some cases, I think they've been closed up on the inside, but we're not necessarily sure they've been really made airtight or put insulation behind them. So it's almost like you've got all these little holes just straight from inside each of your rooms to the outside. So obviously that's something that we'd look to improve. And also over time, you know, people have made holes in walls and done things to them. And we can look at making sure that those are closed up. And also possibly sealing around the edge of windows and making sure that if any installation hasn't been done that well, that we're making that better. And then I think most of you have probably got at least some insulation in your loft. And I know that in the flats, or at least some of them, because I've seen it, there is insulation up in the loft here. But we'd look at possibly upgrading that to make sure it's sort of as much as is sensible. So maybe at the moment you might have 100 millimeters of mineral wool insulation. We might up that to 300 or 400 millimeters. And also consider whether we can insulate the sloping parts of roofs where you've got rooms within the roof. And then, you know, subject to discussion, we can look at the possibility of replacing windows and doors. So as I say, it sounds like there's a real mixture across the close of windows and doors which have and haven't been replaced. And I think it's something we need to, you know, work with you guys to work out which ones actually need upgrading. But you know, double glazing is obviously better than single glazing because you've got this little gap of air in the middle, which is a vacuum and is stopping heat being lost through the windows so much. But in fact, in windows, often the glass part isn't so much where you're losing the heat, but the window frames themselves, if they're not insulated, they can lose heat. And also, if they're not insulated, they can be quite cold on the inside, and that can cause moisture in the air to condense on the inside of the frame, or possibly the inside of the glazing if it's single glazing. And then that can drip off, or it can cause mold to form on the window frame or roundabouts. So having these cold areas on the window or around the edges of the window can be a reason that mold forms. Whereas a modern triple glazed window, you've got much better insulation through the window itself, but also insulated frames and really good sealing. When you close the window, you're actually not getting air moving through that gap around the bit of the window that opens. And as we said, that can improve soundproofing between your home and outside, and also further reduce energy bills. But even if we don't go all the way to replacing windows, there's things we can do with draft stopping and so on to reduce heat loss. And then mechanical extract ventilation. I think all of you will have an extract fan in your bathrooms and probably, hopefully, in your kitchens as well. And that draws moist air and possibly, in the case of the kitchen, smelly air out of those rooms to the outside. But what that means is you've got all this nice warm air in your home that you've paid money to heat up, and then we dump it outside. So that's not the best thing in the world, but it can work okay. But often what's happening is that the fans aren't working very well, or they don't come on for long enough. So we can, you know, if you've got a particular problem with mold in a bathroom, say, we can look at replacing that fan, but also making sure that it's working in a way that it actually is on for long enough to do the job it needs to do. So overall, that's potentially works to windows and the edges of windows, improving roof insulation, and making sure that the mechanical extract ventilation you do have is working properly. And altogether, that can mean a less drafty home, and the heat loss could be reduced by about 1/5, we think, from the modelling that we've done, and also less risk of mould, particularly in bathrooms. But we'd also like to talk to you about the silver standard, which is really exciting. And at the moment, quite a lot of heat is lost through your walls, As Niall explained, we understand that most of the homes, if not all, have some cavity wall insulation between the layer of blockwork and brickwork. There's a bit of insulation, but what usually happens is that isn't very evenly spread across the walls. So there might be some spots where there actually isn't any insulation and they can get quite cold. So one possibility is to put a layer of insulation on the outside of your walls, and that would lead to warmer homes inside because less heat is lost through the walls. And having this insulation on the outside means we can have a really continuous line of insulation, kind of like putting a tea cozy on your house, so it keeps it warm. Obviously, putting insulation on the outside means that that's not too disruptive to the inside of your home. So we wouldn't need people to move out while we're doing that work. It's something that can happen while you're still living in your home. And it doesn't lose any space from the inside of your home. So the inside stays very much as it is. And while in applying insulation on the outside, we'd look to make sure that we make the home more airtight and get rid of any gaps and cracks there are and so on. And it's also an opportunity, if we want to, together as a design team with all of you, to kind of create a new design for how the outside of the homes look. Now, it might be that we decide, like the picture on the bottom left, that we want to put insulation on and then put brick slips back on the outside so that the homes look very much like they do at the moment. But there's also opportunity for something quite different or for some little features of something different. And that's something we really want to work with you to develop. There's a few challenges around this. So where we've got rainwater pipes coming down the sides of the building, they would need to be taken down and then replaced a bit further out because now the walls got a bit thicker. And also, if you've got sort of plants growing right up against the outside walls of your building, they might be interfered with while the insulation is being applied. So we'd work with you to make sure that you're not losing your nice sunflowers or whatever it is. But there is an alternative to putting insulation on the outside where we insulate the inside of the walls. And again, this would lead to you having a warmer home, and it would also mean that the outside of the building doesn't change its appearance. But there are some downsides to this. Obviously, it's quite disruptive, and really while that work's going on, you'd probably need to temporarily move out because that's quite a lot of work to be done to your walls. Also, when we're insulating on the inside, we need to obviously avoid any risk of moisture building up within the wall. And that means it's usually sensible not to try and put too much insulation on the inside. So overall, we probably end up with slightly less insulation, which means although we're reducing the heat loss, we won't be able to do such an effective job. It would also mean, obviously, that you're going to lose a little bit of space from your home. Now, what we've looked at so far suggests that that's between 1% and 5% of your floor area, depending on how big your home is at the moment and whether it's an end property or whether it's a mid-terrace property. Clearly, all this is going to have an impact on finishes and fittings in your home, and that's something we'd need to take into account to make sure that you're not losing anything as work was undertaken. And the other thing that by insulating on the inside, it's really difficult to insulate between your existing floorboards and so on. So again, it ends up being slightly less effective because you've still got a little path for heat to escape, sort of where the first floor is and where the roof meets the wall and so on. It can be tricky to get a really continuous line, but it's still a possibility. So we don't want to write anything off. As you can imagine, although you've got some insulation in your roofs, typically heat's rising, and so heat is lost through the roof. So it would be great to really improve the amount of insulation in your roofs. One possibility is to just insulate between and then above the existing rafters, so the timber structure of your roof. But another possibility, which would really we think of to try and reduce disruption, is almost to sort of crane in a whole new roof almost on top of your roof. Now we're still looking at what's possible and what's happened in other homes, but there's a range of ways we can make sure that we get a new layer of really good insulation onto your roof. And again, in this standard, we'd definitely be looking at triple glazed windows, really because if we're going to put all the effort into making the rest of your walls nice and warm, it would be a shame if the windows let the side down. So again, it's about further reduction of heat loss and not having these drafts and soundproofing and reducing your energy bills. But I think the main thing to say when we come to the silver standard is that, you know, if we're doing work on all the rest of this, it would be a shame to have the windows be the bit that aren't doing as well. And you can see here on the left, the outside and the inside of a couple of the windows at the low energy house at Verity Close. And these are triple glazed windows. And we've tried to follow the sort of fenestration of the previously existing windows. So there doesn't have to be a radical change in appearance just because we're putting in new windows. And now the complicated sciencey part. Not really, but we're talking about making your building a bit more airtight and getting rid of those gaps around windows and so on. But obviously you still need air to breathe in your homes. And at the moment you've got these extract fans, which, as I said, are taking warm air from inside and just dumping all that heat outside. So what we'd look at doing is a system of mechanical ventilation, a bit like you have at the moment, but with heat recovery. So if we start here in, say, the bathroom, you've got warm air and moist air from the shower you're having. And just like you do at the moment, we want to extract that moist air to avoid mold building up in the bathroom, for example. So we're going to suck that up through this pipe here, and it comes to this mechanical ventilation with heat recovery unit. And there's heat in this air. And what happens is that heat is given to some fresh, cold, incoming air from outside. So the air itself doesn't swap over, but the heat is transferred from the stale air from your bathroom and kitchen into this fresh air. So this fresh air has come in and it's been warmed by that air. So now we've got some warm but fresh air, and that comes down these ducts and it gets supplied to your living room, or it gets supplied to your bedroom. So all the habitable rooms in the home that you spend time living in, they get supplied with this nice, fresh but warmed air. And we also need to get rid of that stale air. So we chuck out this stale air, but we've already taken the heat out of it and put it into your new air. So a mechanical ventilation unit like this, they can be up to around 90% efficient. So that means you're recovering 90% of the heat. So whereas at the moment, you're chucking out all the heat in the air that goes out of your extract fan, with a unit like this, you're only chucking out 10% of the heat and you're saving 90% of that heat and keeping it in the house. Now this is just an example diagram. And over here we've got a sort of suggestion of how that might fit into one of the houses at Verity Close. But clearly we need to work with you to understand where there are spaces within the home that we can have ductwork without it impeding your lives too much. And just to kind of put a bit more meat on what I've been talking about, this is a mechanical ventilation with heat recovery unit. That would be one for probably a sort of 3-bed, 5-person or even bigger kind of home. And so these ducts with the insulation on are bringing in the air from outside and getting rid of the air. And then in here, the heat exchange happens. And these ducts are going off to supply air around the home or to bring air back that's been extracted from the bathroom. One of the good things about this as well is that behind this red bit is a filter. And so all of the incoming air is filtered. And when you live in central London as you do, that's really quite a benefit because you don't have to have all the particulates and everything that are happening around London coming into your home. But what's really important to say is that for all this improvement in air tightness and this clever system, you can still open your windows. There's nothing stopping you opening your windows. Everything will still work. And, you know, obviously when it's a delightful day, you want to open the window, and that's really important. And no one's ever going to stop you doing that. So I think that's something definitely to clarify. But also, having shown you a larger unit like this, which might sit in a cupboard or possibly up in a loft or even outside, particularly for the flats where you don't have that much space, there are units that are just that big that work just running through your wall. So you need to install a couple of these in a flat, and it just, all of that system of collecting air and exchanging the heat and so on happens within the thickness of the wall, really. So you just get a small box like that. You probably still need a bit of duct running to, say, the bathroom or the kitchen, but it's a much smaller system, but it's not as efficient, so we wouldn't necessarily suggest using something like that on a larger house. And then I wanted to show you this, which is still under construction when the photo was taken, but this is boxing out around some ductwork for the mechanical ventilation system, running down past one of the rooms. Just to let you know, that's a little key in the top, so that's not a permanent feature. But just like you've got boxing out around your mechanical extract vent from your bathroom at the moment, for example, you might have this in the corner of a room or running across the underside of your ceiling. And then what you actually see in your ceiling, where air is being taken up or delivered, you'd have a little vent like this, so it's about the size of a smoke alarm or something, and that's just very gently supplying this pre-warmed air, and it's a sort of constant supply, so it's never noisy, it's just a very gentle, constant supply. And then the other thing is how we actually heat your homes. So we've talked about how we can reduce the amount of energy your homes use, but as we said with our seesaw at the beginning, we also need to increase the amount of renewable technology that we're using to generate energy for your homes. And one way we can do that is with air source heat pumps. So at the moment, you've got a gas boiler, and that burns gas to heat water, and that water goes into your radiators and also supplies the hot water that come out of your taps. But rather than having this gas boiler, we can use the energy that there already is in the outside air. So a unit like this, an air source heat pump, it takes energy from the outside air. So even on a cold day, there's still energy within the air, and we can pass lots of air through this heat pump and extract that little bit of energy from lots of air, which means we've got quite a lot of energy. And we can pass that energy on in a concentrated form to the water in your home, and then use that water again to run through your radiators like it does at the moment, and also to give you hot water coming out of your taps. So this is an option that we're looking into, but Janet's going to talk to you in a moment about the possibility of the heat network for the whole estate. So that is an alternative way of supplying heat to your homes. So this is one possibility. Continuing with gas boilers is a possibility, but it won't really get us to that net zero carbon goal. And then the heat network is a third way of doing things. So the silver standard overall, we're looking at much more significant measures to walls, to windows, this air source heat pump, mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. And if we do all this and do it really well, we can have pretty much a draft-free home. So that means you can sit right next to your windows and not feel a cold downdraft. It means overall we can reduce the heat loss by about 3/4. So that's a really significant change. Having more insulation in dormers and so on, and in your roof in general, will actually help to reduce overheating, because if it's actually hotter outside than it is inside, then you want insulation between you and the hot outside air. And the mechanical ventilation as well can help with overheating. And as I said, it means that sort of the whole house is warm, not just areas of it. You don't have cold areas near the windows. And getting rid of using gas on site will lead to better air quality, as I said before. And the gold standard we're suggesting is basically all of the things I just talked about in silver, but with additional photovoltaic panels. So photovoltaic panels or solar panels or PV panels, it's all the same thing, but they're talking about getting energy from the sun and turning that into electricity. And then that electricity would be used to power the lights in your home, but also possibly the mechanical ventilation system, and they can help power the air source heat pump. So bringing that all together means we can make even more energy savings and a reduction in your energy bills, and a better reduction in your carbon footprint. But also as regulations are changing over time, so that homes need to become closer and closer to zero carbon, if we do this now and we do everything now, it's far less likely that someone's going to need to come back to your home in 10 or 15 years time and take further measures, because we've really gone for it now while the opportunity's here. And then we've talked obviously about soundproofing. So we know you've got problems, and it sounds like we need to have some more detailed conversations about exactly who's got what problems. But things that we're looking at are installing new insulation between existing joists, possibly installing a new layer of plywood across the existing joists, and then actually screwing it to the joists, because I understand in some people's homes there's a squeaking noise from upstairs, and that's often because the floorboards are moving against the joists. So we can try and mitigate that by a fixed layer of plywood that's actually attached to the joists properly. We might actually in some cases look at whether the joists themselves whether there are enough of them. It sounds like some people need some new floorboards anyway, regardless of soundproofing. So we might look at sort of entirely replacing that floor, and also possibly installing a new acoustically absorbent layer across the top of the existing floor. So for that, we'd need to temporarily remove the floor finish, install this new layer, and then put your floor finish back. And then Niall mentioned at the beginning the entrances to the flats, where we've got bin stores right by what would be really nice if it could be a nice welcoming entrance. So we'd really like to work with you to design what would be a more welcoming entrance to the blocks of flats. So we might create a smaller entrance structure by moving the bin stores elsewhere. So it's a less imposing entrance structure, but actually more generous inside with a bit more space when you get in there. Whether we have a new entrance structure or not, we'd be looking at having a new video entry system to the flats. And if we make the structures slightly smaller, then that means you get slightly bigger front garden space. And there's some really lovely like palm trees and so on in those front gardens at the moment. But if we do that, we've got rid of the bin stores at the front door. So we obviously also need to replace bin stores elsewhere. So here's just some sort of suggestions of bin stores we've seen. They're all quite different, but it'd be interesting to get your views about what you like and what you don't like. But at the moment with the flats, you've really only got space for one bin by each stairwell of the flats. And that means inevitably that needs to be a refuse bin, and there's not much opportunity for recycling. And I've seen like 1 or 2 recycling bins floating around the close, but they don't really have a home. So this is really an opportunity to encourage recycling and food waste composting. And as I say, get rid of that kind of dominating, here's the bin store, and here's our little front door next to it, and make that more welcoming. But then, of course, we need to find a new home for those new bin stores. And there are limitations. The council wants to make sure that from our front doors, none of us has to walk too far to put out our rubbish. So we need to create new bin stores within 30 metres of people's front doors, which is why you can see these circles on the plan here. So this is one block of flats. This is the other block of flats. And we're actually suggesting this is where there's often a recycling bin at the moment. Obviously, we need to make sure that any store here is acoustically separated from number 44 here. But also possibly integrating stores kind of into where there's already a fence along the side of the play area, so that they're not kind of a really intrusive feature of the close. But again, that's something we need to, have more discussions with you about what's important and about which areas you feel you'd happily have a bin store in. So overall, as I said, we've got our bronze standard, which makes some improvements and savings, but it's not amazing. Silver standard, there's a lot more work to it, but it's really taking the opportunity to make the most of what's possible right now. And then the gold standard, which even more so means that we shouldn't need to come back and do anything more because your homes are, by the time we've done this, they're going to be pretty much zero carbon, if not there already, and far more comfortable. And also these other works we talked about around soundproofing and the entrances to flats. So that's really all what we've been, it's not all, but it's the things we wanted to present to you now. And we'd really appreciate thoughts, ideas and questions. I think there's probably been quite a few questions in the chat. So
they're mainly comments. So I've got one from Susan. Poor sound insulation between and next to flats, which I believe you've covered, floors, ceilings and walls. Fans haven't been replaced since the flats were built. I presume that's extract fans, Susan. Susan, do you want to say, do you want to talk about, the fans and just explain it a bit more on that?
Yes, I was just talking about the extractor fans in the kitchen and bathroom. I mean, they're very old. I mean, I think if you're going to do all this work, you might just as well replace them because they're so ancient. It's surprising they've lasted so long.
Yeah, to be fair, that's quite impressive that they've lasted this long at all.
40 years or 50 years. Yeah. And also I said about the recycling, you're talking about the bin stores. We've got a big problem. The recycling bin is right next to my block.
Right.
It makes an awful noise when people are putting things in there. It's an eyesore. And also people dump stuff by the side of it.
Yeah, okay. That's really useful to know, thank you. So I think we need to kind of work really hard on if we are going to move bin stores where they should be, and probably even if we're not, make a proper home for that recycling bin.
Yes, it's the bane of my life.
I also have a comment from Lee. Our floors are solid concrete, so I presume that Verity blocks, right?
In the flats, yeah.
It is, yes. Yeah. I mean, it's in response to, you talking about, nailing, putting extra layers down on top. I'm not sure how you would do that, really. I mean, I've got a wooden floor on top of the concrete, but yeah, basically it's wooden.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the flats with the concrete floor, there are sort of acoustic layers that can be installed on top of the concrete, and then you put your floor finish back on top. But obviously that's, quite invasive to take up your floor finish and do it. So we need to work with each of you to understand, how important it is, make sure we explain to you what difference it could make, but also whether that's something you can countenance or not.
I think in terms of, noise from other flats, I think a lot of it's through the walls.
Right.
Whether it's from immediately next door or above or below, I think noise tends to come down the walls.
Okay.
Predominantly anyway, yeah. Sure. Thanks.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Yes, David is asking if the issue with the squeaky floors, if the issue with the squeaky floors turns out to be an issue with the timbers themselves, will you be able to replace the timbers?
I think the first thing we'd look at doing is probably adding to the existing timbers rather than replacing them completely, because it's easier to keep some floor structure in place while we improve it rather than sort of take it out wholesale. But again, I think it's something that it's particularly in the houses, I guess it's quite an individual issue where you've got noise within the home. So perhaps it's something we can talk to particular residents about what they'd like to happen in their particular home, because I know that for David, it's please take it all out and start again. But I think for other people, that might be too much. So we maybe need to talk to each of you about how far we go with that.
Great, okay. Thanks, Lizzy. I also have a question from Caroline. Does the proposed installation for the outside wall comply with all fire regulations?
So if we were to put insulation on the outside of the building, that would be A1 rated for non-combustibility, which is the best rating there is. So it doesn't burn. And yeah, so yes, is the answer.
Yes, well, she's very concerned about cladding outside of the
course, I mean, I would be too.
Yes, thank you. I think that's all. Does anyone else have questions, thoughts, suggestions? Feel free.
I'd like to.
Yes, I do as well.
And me.
Do you, Stephen?
All right. First, I'm just curious about the external insulation that you talk about, especially with brick buildings. I mean, how on earth do you deal with, they look like it's structurally brick built. So, I mean, how would you possibly deal with the outside of a brick building? I mean, do you take bricks off and replace? I mean, that seems extraordinary.
No, we wouldn't take the existing bricks off. We would leave the existing walls as they are. And there are various different methods of attaching insulation to the outside. But I'll just actually go back to the picture we had because it's worth.
Because, I mean, it looks like the replacement bricks would not really be as nice, remotely as nice as the ones that you were covering.
No, that's right.
But just to start on how it's done, in a case like this, we've got a fairly rigid insulation, and that's put on the outside, and then kind of pins are pushed through to hold it to the existing brickwork. But there are other systems where you kind of fix metal pins kind of first with a layer on the outside, and then you pump in mineral wool insulation, so non-combustible insulation. There's various different ways of doing it. Or you can even get a whole panel made in a factory, and you know, you measure the building very carefully first, build a panel in a factory, come along and fix it to the outside.
I would be extremely unhappy to see the brick. I mean, I think the features
Yes, I agree.
Yep.
You know, scarring that with anything but what's there would be a big mistake in my estimation.
Yes, it would be. I agree.
So these brick slips here, there are a huge variety of different sorts of brick slips. So some of them that are less nice are kind of extruded and they look like it, and they're not really made like bricks. But you can also have systems where you get a real brick and you chop the front off it and you use that. So what you're left with appearance-wise is very much what you had beforehand. Obviously, it's going to look a little different initially from how it did before, because it'll be kind of a new brick with new mortar and so on. What was the other thing I was going to say about it? I mean, I don't love brick slips like this, but they do give us this opportunity to make huge energy savings and improve homes, while also keeping something not too different from what's there at the moment.
My other question is, as a leaseholder, how is this financial? I mean, I think what you're doing is great, except the fact that, you know, most of us have been unemployed for a year, and it's, you know, it's a very difficult time financially. So how is all this being meted out between the leaseholders and renters and council and whoever else is involved? Because that's, for me, a major issue that is not to be ignored in these wonderful ideas.
Of course. I'm going to hand back to James on this one, though, because I don't think you want your architect talking about financial matters.
Can I have that in writing, Lizzie? Thanks, Stephen, for that question. So where we are with regards to leaseholders on Lancaster West is there's recognition by the council of the reason why we are doing the work we're doing is because of the impact and wake of the Grenfell tragedy. So for our resident leaseholders, and that would include our shared owners, we don't have any shared owners on Verity Close, we are applying a 54.4% discount to all chargeable works, okay? And that's just for resident leaseholders. Non-resident leaseholders and Notting Hill Genesis and other people who own homes primarily for profit, that discount doesn't apply. There is an overall cap, so the most we could ever charge in a 5-year period is £15,000. The repayment plans that are on offer go all the way up to 10 years. But in terms of what we're talking about now, and I think, Stephen, you mentioned something at the beginning about this, what we have in RBKC is 99.9% of all leases in RBKC are repair only. So what does that mean? That means we can only charge if we're replacing something that's already there. Okay, if something is an improvement and the wall insulation you're looking at is an improvement, we aren't required to do it. we wouldn't be charging leaseholders a penny. So one of the key things we wanted to do is make sure that our leaseholders could share in the benefit of the opportunity that additional investment would bring. So whilst I can't say there would be no charges whatsoever, it would be for things like replacing door entry systems for those of you in flats, for example. If you've got single glazing and let's say we move to triple, then what we would do is only charge up to double. And then if you like, the triple bit would be free, if that makes sense. Now, it's incredibly complex and there are all manner of scenarios, particularly with Verity Close to go through. But I think what we can do is restate with a bit more clarity now we've got the funding in terms of what the implications would be for leaseholders. But the easy way to think about it is if something doesn't need repair, and by that those of you who've got double glazed windows don't, then replacing them with triple, and I think Susan brought this up at my Q&A a couple of weeks ago, we wouldn't be able to recharge even if we tried to, because you'd take us to a first tier tribunal and win, bluntly. So a lot of the extras, if you like, that go above and beyond, there will be zero charge to any leaseholder, in fact. So I hope that provides a bit of assurance.
And what is the time scale on this refurbishment? I mean, we are in the epidemic at the moment, and the last time things were, the last refurbishments we had were painfully slow. And so what is your least optimistic vision of this?
My least optimistic vision, well, I should tell you I'm quite an optimistic person.
I know, that's why I want to hear the least.
So yeah, I think we're looking at a 3 to 4 year programme. Now that said, 25% of all tenanted properties have now had some form of refurbishment. We're starting now at Moorland House at that block level, internal refurbishment, moving to Campbell Mews, Talbot Walk, and then Verity Close will follow fourth in line, if you like. So that's for those of you that are tenants, the new kitchens, the bathrooms, the internal decor, and so on. I think really some of it depends on how quickly residents coalesce around particular choices. So we'll go as fast as we can, but as slow as we have to. The other thing is that a lot of the work that we're looking at here, sorry, could we just pop mute on? I can hear someone typing out a few emails in the background, thank you. I think the thing about what we're talking about here is it has the potential to be significantly disruptive. So some of that is about how do we work around, exactly as you raised, Stephen, the fact that we're in a pandemic. Now is not the time where people are necessarily going to want, builders popping in and out of their property and all the rest of it. And so, we'll work with residents down. And the reason why we've broken the estate down into just focusing on Verity Close is so that we can respond and do what is right just for Verity Close as a group of residents. So we're getting away with this normal sort of one-size-fits-all approach that a lot of local authorities take. And but to actually answer your question, we're all clear that this is a significant amount of work. But as Lizzie said, whether it's 2030 or 2050, retrofit is something that all of us have got to go through. 80% of the homes we'll be living in 2050 already exist. Yeah, so this is going to be something as a nation we're going to have to go through. What we've got is an opportunity to reduce all that disruption into one window rather than 2 or 3 over the next sort of decade or so.
My last question is, how are these decisions going to be made? Is it hands up in a group meeting, or, I mean, how, this sounds like an extremely complex decision-making process, and how is this going to be seen to be equitable to the various people's interests?
Yeah, another excellent question, Stephen. So what some of the learning that we've done is, where possible, what we don't want to do is have something as simplistic as a hands up vote, or let's all vote now on what people want and what have you. So where possible, we'll deliberate. So we'll engage with as many residents as possible. Our target is to engage over 50% of residents in each block or part of the estate. And where possible, avoid a binary, this option or that option, unless we really have to. As I said at the outset, today's really about the start of a conversation where we follow up surveys, where on a one-on-one basis we'll say, based on what you know at the moment, what sort of thing would you like to see? What are your concerns? And there'll be a lot of back and forth. So a lot of you said we did type approaches. We've done some learning we've done a lot of learning in terms of the internal refurbishment, where we've made about 150 changes to that specification as and when we've gone along, based on feedback from residents. A lot harder to do that when you've got to decide what a whole block looks like, or what the close looks like. So it won't be as easy, but we've certainly learned from the engagement we've done recently for Camelford Court, where we've secured some funding for potentially a green roof with solar PV panels on the top, is that we can't take for granted the amount of time it will take for us to really explore with residents. What we're proposing is really what they would like. So, you know, we've just had a conversation about brick slips. If we just put up here now, here's 6 options of different brick slips, it may just split the room. Yeah, so we probably need to have more in-depth conversations and then come back and go, actually, most people gravitated to that. Is that something people can live with? We'll sense in the room and in the discussions we have if there are strong divisions. And then I think ultimately we would need the majority of people to agree with how we would make a decision. So where we've had to make decisions quite quickly, so we had to make one quite quickly with Treadgold House as an investment, then we did have a yes-no ballot, if you like. And where we did that, we had 86% of residents engaged, and 96% of residents actually wanted to go to the equivalent of the gold standard that we've looked at today. But I think the learning of the team in very recent weeks is that it's conversations like we're having now, which will start to glean, you know, what are the concerns, what have we missed, what have we got to, you know, come back with. And so, you know, as I've popped in the chat there with brick slips, we could find brick slips that are almost identical to the brickwork you've got now. Going back to the window game we played earlier, yeah, none of us could, well, most of us couldn't tell which one stood out. So it is possible to do retrofit. If people want to keep the character of Verity Close as it is now, we can do that. If people want to take a more modern approach or a more historic period approach, we can do that as well. So we'll have lots of conversations, and then we'll come back in probably meetings like this, see where we get to.
Thanks, James. I also have a question from Jackie, a really good one. Great presentation and ideas. If external wall insulate EWI option is chosen, this is going to look weird on terraces and on Verity Close as a whole if freeholders do not join in. So this is about Verity Close houses where you have, you know, council.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely, and we're conscious of that, and it's something we're working to think about. And I think one of the takeaways from the discussion so far this evening is that people are quite keen, even if we do put external wall insulation on, to keep the external appearance quite similar. So that's one approach we might take. The other thing I was looking at around the local area, in Notting Hill, you've got these terraces of buildings that were all originally built as one very consistent facade, and people have come along and painted them different colours and rendered them and so on. And granted, they've developed over much more time than the age of Verity Close, but there can be delight in that variance. So I don't want to write off completely the idea that we might do something different, but you know, this is why we're having this discussion. And if you all think it can't possibly look different, then we will absolutely work to keep it looking as similar as possible, or even consider that internal wall approach.
Great, thanks, Lizzy. Another question from Fazim. Will you be dealing with plumbing and changing pipes?
I personally won't be, but I mean, part of the, I think mostly probably not, but that's sort of something, certainly it doesn't affect the energy efficiency particularly in general. I suspect that when sort of the kitchen and bathroom programme that was being talked about, that's going to happen sort of across the estate over time, that's going to pick up quite a lot of stuff to do with plumbing. So I think probably that's better addressed with kitchens and bathrooms rather than with this work.
Great. Yeah, I think that answers it. I have another question from Susan. What about fire doors and sprinklers?
Broadly speaking, we're not expecting to make any changes to the layouts of homes or anything. So we wouldn't expect to change the existing sort of fire strategy. But we are considering, particularly where we've got 3-storey houses, making sure that there's a safe escape route and so on, although you've already got escape front and back, so that's a real bonus in terms of fire safety. In the flats, we obviously need to, we need to work with Lancaster West to make sure that all the doors that are currently there are up to standard, and if not, obviously replace them.
Okay.
And sorry, there was a second part to the question that I forgot.
Yeah, this is about plumbing and replacement of pipes.
Oh, but you talked about sprinklers. Sorry, that was the other thing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's the other.
And I think that was probably an over to Lancaster West question again.
Yes. James, do you want to talk about the fire door? I presume this is flat entrance doors.
Yes, that's fine. And Susan and I had a few conversations about this. So in terms of the main front doors to a 30-minute fire resistance level, there is a borough-wide programme which is done in terms of risk, as you would expect. So starting with tower blocks, for example, and then more complex buildings. So on Lancaster West, it's Teston Moor, Barrington Moor, Hurstwade Walk. It's Treadgold House, where you've only got one stairwell to escape, and you might, in the unlikely event of a fire and you need to get out, you would need to pass other properties. We'll then be looking at Clarendon Walk and Camelford Walk next, Moorland House and Talbot Grove House. So Verity Close would probably be in the cohort after that. You're probably talking a couple of years. What we are doing, though, is fire risk assessments to a Type 4 level, which is the most high level you can do in terms of ensuring that between walls and bits that we wouldn't normally see, we're factoring all of this in so that ECD can design out any latent risks in terms of the building. In terms of sprinklers, I'd be very surprised if there's a recommendation for sprinklers based on current regulations for Verity Close. But what we will be doing as part of the internal refurbishment programme is introducing radio-linked alarms in all habitable rooms, and our internal doors as well, which you would have seen, for those of you who went to the very first open house, in fact, 25 Verity, the wood grain doors that everybody has fallen in love with, they're also to a 30-minute fire resistance as well. So in all the different work that we're doing, we're increasingly improving fire safety. We've also got with us, I think, Mark from D-Risk. I don't know, including if we want to bring Mark in just to explain his role to kick the tyres on all the health and safety stuff that we're talking about.
Mark, do you want to introduce yourself and talk about what you're doing and yeah.
Sure. Hi everybody. My name's Mark Allen. I'm a chartered health and safety consultant working for a company called D-Risk. Our role in this project, as it is with all of the other lots across the estate, is CDM, principal designer. Without going sort of too much into the technicalities, what that means is that there is a legal duty for projects such as this to have a person or an organisation responsible for management of health and safety during the pre-construction phase. So typically before any contractors come on board. Our role primarily is to make sure that designers, ECDA, are applying the principles of prevention. And essentially what that means is there is a preference in terms of risk management. It's always better, for example, to eliminate a risk than it is to try and reduce it or indeed to control it. So we are responsible for reviewing and monitoring all designs. We are involved in reviewing and kind of writing the specification for various types of surveys that are occurring at the moment. We also review proposals from contractors and consultants. That includes the methodology for construction. There's various different ways of kind of installing and refurbishing the kind of the products that we're talking about using. Our role in the project is to make sure that we're considering your safety as well as the safety of consultants and contractors actually doing the works. We are involved in procuring the contractors. So, for example, any contractors are looking to be appointed to do these works. We are involved in assessing their health and safety competencies. So we're reviewing them to make sure that they are able to demonstrate that they can do the work safely, and ultimately ensure that you as residents, aren't put at any risk during the works, but also that once the works are finished and we're gone, that you're left with a very safe and reliable house, essentially. So there's sort of various other technical aspects to the job, but in terms of any sort of questions regarding health and safety, I'd be pleased to answer these either on this platform or through ECDA.
Great, thanks, Mark. Does anyone have questions for Mark? Yeah. Okay. Yes, Lizzy, I have another comment from Lee. There's no damp-proof course in the basement of Verity Close. Do you want to address that?
Absolutely, that's something that needs to be addressed, especially if we're to start putting insulation on either side of external walls, because otherwise we'll be kind of trapping any damp that's in the walls. I'm interested in when you say the basement.
Yeah, it's the blocks of flats. My understanding, anyway, is that there is no, damp coursing.
Yep.
And that some of the ground floor flats have been quite damp at times over the years.
Yeah.
Which I think I would, relate it to that.
I think there's, I agree that I can't see a damp-proof course. It's the first thing to say. I know that in some cases it looks like also the ground out the back is very wet.
Yeah.
In a few cases, there's things clearly dripping that just need maintaining, but that isn't going to solve the whole problem. It's possibly also about drainage of that ground at the back, and also possibly about injecting a damp-proof course.
Yeah.
But certainly before we start installing any insulation, we need to be absolutely clear that those walls are not going to continue to be sucking water up from the ground.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Caroline, you've got your hand raised. Do you want to ask a question now? No? Caroline?
Yes, I would like to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. I'm a freeholder here in Verity Close. I bought my house 14 years ago. And would you be so kind to answer my question if freeholders would face any charges? You addressed it about the leaseholders, that they would face charges for items that be replaced. What about freeholders?
Yeah, so I'm happy to pick that up, Carolyn. Thank you for joining us firstly, and thank you for your question. So if you look at your freehold agreement, it outlines the very few services that are provided to your home and to Verity Close as a mini estate, if you like, that would be chargeable. And that's things like drainage, so the drainage, from the main sewers up to your property, up to the boundary of your property, communal lighting, perhaps CCTV repairs. It's minimal. So for any freeholders such as yourself and Joe and others in the room, there would be no prospect of considerable charges at all. And in fact, it wouldn't be any more, I wouldn't have thought, than charges you may currently get on an annual basis anyway, such as their sort of insignificance. That said, there are interdependencies. So we've got freeholders next to tenants in terms of the low energy home on Verity Close that ECD have been working with the team on. That was next door to a freeholder, and there were some interdependencies around replacing the roof there and what have you. But that wouldn't be something we could charge you for. So it may well, if anything, mean that I know there's a lot of disruption activity on the close, but it may mean that your home gets certain benefits by proxy, if you like, in terms of you'll be living next to a much warmer home than you may be at the moment. But obviously there's technical assumptions there as well, which I'm not qualified to talk about. But please rest assured that there won't be any sizable bills for our freeholders who won't be benefiting to the same extent as our tenants and our leaseholders.
Thank you so much for answering this. At the moment, I actually have a problem like this that has been going on for a few years. I'm in the mid-terrace, and on one side, the corner house is a council house owned, but we all share one gutter for the roofs, and the gutter is broken, so the rainwater runs outside of the walls of the houses, which obviously is not good either then for the walls with containing then the moisture and ugly stains it leaves. So I have repaired my section, the midsection, but the water from her side always runs down to my side because on her side it's blocked and it's not very secure. And I've been a few times to the Lancaster West Centre and nothing is being done. So I can only take care of my part, but obviously on both sides I share the gutter with other houses, and that makes it very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the repairs that we undertake across the estate, they fix the problem in one location and then the next weakest point gives way. So one of the things we want to do with the refurbishment is make sure that the level of repairs we're having to do is much lower, and that's for everyone. So things that are shared like guttering and drainage, we want to make sure that it works for everyone rather than just sort of patch it up and then everything carries on going wrong in the way your example makes really clear.
So during this refurbishment process now, will you be looking at replacing the existing gutters as well?
Absolutely, yeah. We'll be doing extensive surveys to make sure that all the basics work, and absolutely we'll look to ensure that those sorts of things are in place. In fact, we're legally obliged to make sure that they work. Because
you're very happy to come and have a look, because it's very obvious when you have a look outside on the houses, you can see the damage. And the other thing I wanted to point out, a few years ago as well, already on the public walkway from Dalford Street to Lancaster Road, where the childcare centre is, we have these paving tiles on the pavement, on the ground, and on several places in this, it started to sink again. Have you noticed that on your walkabouts?
I have noticed the problem on my walkabouts in terms of the exact paving slabs. I can't say I'm immediately familiar. I know exactly where you mean. Lower Clarendon. We are looking as part of the Grenfell Nursery development improving that area. And in terms of things like lighting and CCTV, we would absolutely welcome your input in terms of that sort of stuff as well.
It's such a shame because it's only been done. That is something that I have noticed. Whenever some work is carried out on the estate, it's not to a very good standard. Like they replaced the floor because we had that sinking problem before. So they just come and put some new pavements down, but they don't make it very secure and safe. And then just a few years, and we spend all this money, and then a few years later, we have the same problem again. It's such a shame.
And that's why we want residents such as yourself involved in the selection of those contractors moving forward. So you will have as much say as we do in terms of who we bring in to do some of the work once we've established what the final designs look like.
Sure, thanks. Lizzy, do you want to carry on with the presentation and then we'll move on?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think we're going to hand over to you to talk a bit.
So we've already surveyed the outside of Verity Close and some of the communal areas, but there are some further surveys that we'd like to conduct that will help us gather even more information about how your homes are working, which will enable us to make the best possible recommendations and explore some further ideas with you about what you might like to do in terms of refurbishment. So these surveys that we'd like to do in addition would involve looking at the inside of your property. So we'd need to work with you and we'd need your permission. And we are in fact looking for volunteers to help us out with these. So I'd like to go through these just quite briefly. So the first survey that we're interested in doing in addition is a measured survey of the inside of your homes. So this would involve a surveyor spending about 5 to 10 minutes in each of your rooms using like a laser scanner to take really accurate measurements to help us work out the internal layout. That's really helpful for us when it comes to the design process. It helps us work out, for example, if we are going to go down the route of ventilation, how that might all work, or if you do choose to think further about insulation, it helps give us a better idea of the ins and outs of how that might be possible. The second survey, if we could go to the next slide, is a thermal and humidity survey. So this would involve a small little sensor like the one that you can see in the picture there, being installed inside your flat. That takes 5 to 10 minutes or so just to pop it in there. And then it's left to gather information about the temperature inside your flat for about 3 weeks or so. These are really useful because they tell us the temperatures inside your flat, and that can indicate to us information about energy usage. That again helps us make our helps us think about proposals and future directions with even more precision. These monitors are already in use at Treadgold House, and I actually understand that there are already a few people among Verity Close residents who volunteered for this, so that's brilliant, and we're really very thankful for that. But if there are others of you listening who might be able to, who feel willing to have one of these sensors in your homes, that would be really useful to us. The more information we have, the better. And the third survey, this isn't so much about looking for volunteers, but we would like to let you know about it. It's a bit different. It's called a thermographic imaging survey. And this isn't anymore about the inside of your flats. It's about working out where heat is lost on the outside of your building. And this involves surveyors coming to the site and setting up some cameras in the afternoon. And these cameras are left to take images through the night, and they produce images like the one that you can see here, which gives a really good indication of where heat might be being lost. This shouldn't be too disruptive to you. They'll just go about their business as usual. But sometimes their cameras are placed on quite large masts, so it might be a bit confusing if you don't quite know what's going on. So that's just something to be aware of. And we will be writing to you once the date for that survey has been confirmed, because it can be really helpful if it's where possible to keep your windows closed while the survey is going on, and also to keep your flats as warm as you can. Not anything beyond what's normal for you, but just when there's the greatest contrast between the cold air outside and the temperatures inside, that produces the most useful information. So 3 things there. So there are 2 surveys that, if you're interested in finding out a bit more, we'd be really glad to be in touch with you, and we'd be really grateful for anyone who's happy to either have the inside of their flat measured, or to have a little sensor placed there. And then the third thing is to say is that, do look out for this thermographic survey taking place. And just to note, as with everything else at the moment, all of these surveys will be in compliance with COVID-19 regulations. You don't have to be inside while the measured survey is going on, and people will be wearing masks at all times and keeping their distance when they're installing the sensors. So those are the surveys that we wanted to tell you about. And like I say, it would be really, really great if people are willing to take part. Oh, we've got a question there, I think. Do you only need the flats measured, or would you like the houses too? Sorry, I think I might have just said flats there. I think we're interested in the internal layouts of houses as well as flats. So if that's, is this chipping in there?
Yes, houses and flats, all the homes, any homes.
Yeah, we'll take them all. Lee said, already done this, very straightforward. Yeah, that's really good to hear. None of these are particularly disruptive. And thank you so much, Lee. That really helps us do our jobs as well as we can.
Cool.
Can I just ask, are you looking for freeholders' houses or just the tenanted ones?
I guess it's best if we focus on the tenanted and leasehold properties.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jo.
So I'm going to hand over to Janet Hall now from the Heat Network. Janet, are you there?
Yes. Hello. Thank you everyone for hanging on. I am going to keep my section super brief this evening, and it's great to see a few familiar faces of people I've already spoken to as well. So I'm part of a very small team that have come into Lancaster West Estate in the last few weeks. We all have a professional background working on heat networks, and I have been appointed specifically to do community engagement on heat networks. So we've been brought in off some central government funding to look at a heat network as a potential future heating option for the estate. So to give you a bit of a background on heating at Lancaster today, because Verity Close is actually in the minority of how homes are heated. So Treadgold, yourselves, and Camborne Mews all have individual boilers, but the rest of the estate is actually powered by two large communal boilers, one based in the walkways and one based on the east side of the estate, serving lots of the buildings, the Camelford Walk and courts and so on. So as Lizzie mentioned earlier, there is a kind of national move away from gas, which is the main heating source for heating across the estate today. So that's something that the government is looking to roll out from 2030 onwards as part of our steps towards net zero. And so we are looking at renewable energy alternatives for this estate, and one of those being the heat network option. If you could go to the next slide, please. So a heat network in very simple terms is large-scale plumbing. There's one central energy centre that would supply heating, a hot liquid to each individual building, and then within each building there would be a heat interface unit in each home, which would then transfer the heat to a standard central heating system. So your radiators and your hot water cylinder could be supplied by that. So the option that we're currently looking at is essentially to replace the two heat networks and bring them together to form one much larger heat network that may in the future have the capability for Verity Close households to plug into it. So that's one possible heating solution that could provide your homes in the future. Next slide. So just like the rest of the refurbishment, heating is going to go through a co-design process that's essentially going to tag on to these kind of events and to some pop-up events happening across the estate as well. So at present we are doing a lot of technical studies to actually figure out what kind of energy source we can use. So there were a couple of engineers in the walkways recently who were actually putting thermometers into the local sewers, as that may be one of the potential sources. We're also looking at air source and ground source. So there will be some opportunities if you're interested in the technical side of it to tap into that along the way. And then in March and April, we're hoping to have the options, the real kind of technical options, the real business case management model available so that residents can review it. And we're going to kind of break that down into a series of questions and kind of accessible documents and so on. And then in the next step will be June, we're looking to get a kind of an overview of where residents, what they think of the project, what you think of the project, and where we're going to take it and whether this is a preferred option or not. Next slide. And the final thing is, if you haven't already seen it, I've put it at the chat at the very beginning and I'll put it in again now, but you should have received a survey in your home. I think it was last week, possibly the week before. It's really short. It's only about 5, well, maybe 9 questions long. But if you could fill that out, it would be really helpful. We have to prove to funders that there's a reason that you need new heating. And so every survey helps us show the government that you do need new heating and get more money to make it happen. So it would be fantastic if you could fill those out. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Lizzy?
I think really just to say thank you so much for coming to this event. And we're obviously hoping to hold more events, starting to focus a bit more on the benefits, but also the implications of the work that we're talking about, and make sure that we're, being open and honest to you about what it would mean for your homes to do some of these things. And also talk about the look and the feel of the buildings in a bit more detail. We've touched on that today, but there's clearly lots of opinions. So we'd want to start discussing specific materials and so on. And so before we meet again, we'd like to share with you, we'll be going out a letter and a leaflet about some of the things we've discussed, but also the slides that were in this presentation. And also the presentation is going to be going online, as Bumi said at the beginning. And also the feasibility study that ECD have done on the whole of Verity Close. That'll be available online and in print. And we're trying to plan an outdoor pop-up event for anyone who's happy to attend something like that, as well as kind of more detailed one-to-one survey, because as I think what we've really come up with tonight is there's quite a lot of variety among your homes, and we really need to get to the bottom of who's got what specific problems, and that'll help us make sure that we're developing the right solution for all of you. So I think, yeah, that's us.
Thanks, Lizzy. So I wanted to let you know about our e-newsletter, which we launched in October 2020 for residents of the estate. It's the best way to keep up to date with all the refurbishment news on the estate. So you can either scan the QR code or follow the link in the chat. And there are also posters up on all notice boards around the estate with the QR code, or you can find it on our Instagram bio, the Lancaster West Neighbourhood Team Instagram account. When you sign up, you have the option of putting which block you live in. And this is very helpful if we move to block newsletters in the future. A recording of this meeting will be going up on our YouTube channel and also embedded in our We Are W11 app, which you can download from the App Store or on our website. If you do have any further questions about this presentation or comments, then please get in touch with the Lancaster team. You've probably received letters from me. You can also email me. And thanks to everyone once again for joining us today. Thank you. Okay, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye.